Hey friends, welcome to Flite Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build, assemble, and solder together our new FT Guardian XP. Now if you're wondering what the XP stands for, on this Guardian it stands for extra power. It's mainly because we took our Gremlin 1106 6000 kV motors and partnered with them our FT stem stack. Now what you're going to notice is unique about our stem stack is we're going to be taking you through the process of desoldering the leads. That's because our stem stack was originally a solder-free solution all the way up to 5-inch. Matter of fact, the 4-in-1 ESC on this can go up to 38 amps, which means you're going to definitely want to keep those extra components because this control board and ESC combo can grow with you. Now, just because this has extra power does not mean that this won't be a fantastic first experience for Gremlins or even getting into multi-rotors themselves. It just simply means you're going to have that little bit extra power to carry something like an Insta360 Go 2 and the ability to get about 20% more speed. But on a good note, this system's still going to be docile enough for you to have a great experience both indoors and outdoors. Now in this video, we're going to really be covering the assembly and the soldering together of our stem stack to these 1106 motors. Now if you're new to soldering, we have a great video that will be linked down below giving you tips and tricks to having a great experience and learning how to solder. Now this video is going to cover the assembly and everything you see right here. Once we're done with that, your next video is going to be with our good friend Wes, and he's going to show you how to download the configuration files. He's going to show you how to set up Betaflight, change your motor rotation, and get everything set up. Keep in mind with these Gremlins, and also specifically this Guardian, boards may change, but oftentimes Betaflight will not. So you may see a different board in this build, but it's going to work the exact same. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order, and we'll get started. Now the first step we're going to be doing in our Guardian XP is to be prepping our stem board. Now this is what we affectionately call our FT stem stack, and this stem stack is specifically designed for a solder-free solution to go all the way up to 5-inch. Each one of these ESCs can handle up to 38 amps, which is incredible. The nice thing about this is we can also take this down because of its lightweight into our Guardians and our Gremlins very easily. But what we're going to need to do first is desolder the main XT60 connectors and all of our bullet connectors. And from that point on, we'll install it into our frame and start soldering our motors back onto the ESCs. Now one thing I'd encourage you to do is save these connectors, because once you've outgrown maybe the Guardian and you want to move on to something more, you can easily put these back on, and our F-Pack motors are great solutions for your first 5-inch quad, and you have everything you need right here. So I got my soldering iron all soldered up here, and what I'm just going to do is I'm going to make sure I don't put too much pressure down the pads. I'm just going to kind of open it with my fingers, and a light touch is all you need to melt the solder, and one by one you'll see them pop right off. I'm running my soldering iron right about 815 degrees. And you can see that they pop off very quickly. I can also reflow these pads out, and actually they'll be tipped for our motors in the future. And we'll do the other side. Just a little bit of pressure is all we need. Of course, you can use helping hands if you want to. Again, I'm going to go ahead and put these aside. I'm going to save them for a future project, or I can always reinstall those if I ever want to build a 5-inch in the future that's plug and play. And if you want an easy solution for some helping hands, just take a pair of pliers here, put a rubber band around it, and you instantly have something that has a nice heavy base, so you can manage it and be able to also give you pressure at the same time. And our last step here is we're just going to go ahead and flow out our battery leads, a little bit of pressure. We want to soften it up, and there it goes. Flow that out, and one more. Just let this soften up, and there we go. And just like before, we're just going to flow those two out, and they're pre-tinned for the next piece. All right, I'm going to take those pieces and put them aside and save them for a later project. Now I'm going to bring back in my XT30 connector. This is going to be the connector that we use for our Guardians and our Gremlins, and I'm going to solder that down, making sure my positive and negatives match the battery terminals that I just removed. And if you want to make your soldering job mainly for your battery leads even easier, notice that the pads are on the bottom of your 4-in-1 ESC as well. I'm just going to go ahead and tin these and then solder them onto the bottom. And always remember, anytime you do a soldering joint and it doesn't look pretty, it's not shiny, it looks cracked or dull or cratered, that's a sign that you don't have a good soldering joint. Go back and reflow it and redo it again. Always give a good pull afterwards too to make sure that your joints are nice and solid. Proper tinning both of your component and the pads is going to make that whole process much easier for you in the future. And I'm just going to reconfirm that my positive matches with my positive, my negative matches with my negative, and also before we put any power in this, we're going to take our voltmeter and we're going to check to make sure we have no shorts anywhere. Now that we have our main 4-in-1 ESC all soldered up with a battery lead, we're ready to go ahead and install that on our main frame. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Now to prep our main frame, you're going to see that we took the bottom of our Gremlin Guardian frame, we installed all of our standoffs all the way around, and we also used the included hardware on our stem stack to install on the bottom plate here to receive that. Now you're going to see there's many different hole options. The ones we're going to use are going to be on the outer hole of the diagonals. Along with that, we've also installed all 4 of our motors, making sure that we don't use screws that are too long that are going to hit the windings. And we've screwed these motors in a way where the wires will guide around these posts here, and then go to our main control board. Make sure you have all these items installed before we move on to the next step. Now that we've installed all of our standoffs, our motors, and our center mounts for our control board, let's carefully open up the power lead, and we're going to slide this directly over the rear facing standoff and slide this all the way down to the base. Now at this point, we're going to start soldering our motors onto our 4-in-1 ESC. Now it's really important here that we make sure that we guide this around the standoff and then to the proper ESC, and that we make sure that we don't mix up the 3 wires with any other pads. So in this case, our rear left motor is going to go to the rear left 3 pads. Our front left motor is going to go to the front left, front right, and rear right to the rear right. Always make sure you check this out. And the easiest way is to simply take all 3 of your motor leads, wrap them around the standoff, and then take them to where they need to go. Now if you want to make your build nice and clean and also make sure that you don't accidentally have your props hit the leads, go ahead and pull this taunt and then cut it about 1/4 inch beyond. When you back this off a little bit, it's going to give you just enough slack to be able to easily solder on your connectors, but also not have too much extra wire that may get caught in your props later. So I'm just going to guide this here. I'm going to take it to the rearmost. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch beyond the leads, just so I have plenty of room to be able to work with my wires. I'm going to cut it right there. Now once we've cut our wires to length, I'm just going to go ahead and just use my fingernail, strip off a couple millimeters of length on each side. Always make sure you give your wires a nice twist to remove any air gaps. If you have any air gaps, that's going to act as an insulation and your solder is not going to flow into the wire properly. Once you've done that, we'll pre-tin our tip of our iron, let it flow into the wire, let it flow into the wire, let it flow into the wire. If at any point your wire retracts and you need to trim this to a better length, it's very easy to do so with a simple pair of side cuts. Now using the main control board as our helping hands, all we simply need to do, press our wire right down on there, let the solder flow, and let it cool. A little tug between each connection is always important just to make sure you have a nice solid connection. I'm going to go ahead and carefully bend these down and out of the way. And we're going to do the exact same process on the other 3 motors. We're going to clip the leads to length, we're going to strip and tin the ends of the motor wires, and we're going to match up the motor to the appropriate pads and solder them in place. You don't have to worry about the order of the motor leads because we can always change the direction of the motor leads in the computer later. Now that all of our motors are soldered down, what you have should look just like what you see here. Again, we're going to notice that the motor leads will wrap around and go to the appropriate pads, and that we've also stress tested all of our connections, and they look good and they're nice and strong. Once we've soldered all our connections, we can dress everything up by simply bending these down very delicately, and now we know that we won't have any concerns about the props hitting our wires. At this point, we're going to move on to our next step, and that's going to be installing the little standoffs that are going to lock down our 4-in-1 ESC on the bottom and also hold our top control board in the proper location. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Included with our stem stack, we have the hardware that you see right here. We've already used some of that hardware to mount our control board. We're going to go ahead and grab these little, I think these are about 6mm or 5mm standoffs. And using our thumbs, we're going to screw these down over the long screws all the way down. Now these don't have to be tightened down extremely tight. Just get them nice and snug with your finger. So at this point, our soldering is pretty much done with our ESC and our 4-in-1. We have our battery lead, we have our motor leads all soldered. Again, it's always important to make sure you come back with a voltmeter and check to make sure we have no shorts. We're going to be doing that at the very end. Now's our time to put our attention towards our main control board. Now along with our Guardian kit, we are including the buzzard, and we also have our FPV camera. This is our Caddx Ant all-in-one that we worked with Caddx specifically on. It actually has a little lead so you can even put it in airplanes. But in this case, we're going to be chopping this off and we're going to be soldering directly to the control board so we can draw its power from there. And if you haven't already done it, let's go ahead and install our Caddx Ant all-in-one camera into our little housing that's 3D printed. Now keep in mind, you may have to trim a little bit around this hole. Make sure that your front lens can easily pass through the hole. If it's too tight, trim that so it can pass through. Once you have that, all we simply need to do is line up our lens. We're going to open up the clamshell nice and wide, and then we're going to press it with our fingers until it passes through. There we go, a little press, and it's in. We're going to go ahead and put this aside for the moment, and we're going to put our attention now towards our main control board. Now you can see we already have our DSM Spectrum receiver lead that works on DSM Spectrum. It also works on our Lemon RX system. And also in our kit we include the buzzard. And if you look closely on the little sticker, you're going to see that the positive lines up with the red lead. Now this is really important not to remove the sticker, because for this application, if you want to install your buzzer, we're going to go ahead and completely remove these two wires and use the stems on the bottom here to solder directly on the board, just to keep it neat and compact. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Buzzers are incredibly useful because if you crash in the weeds, or you crash out in a cornfield, or you just simply can't find your quad out in the middle of nowhere, you can assign this to a switch which will make it beep on command. If I'm not mistaken also, when the battery gets low, you'll be able to activate this and it'll chirp for you. I got my soldering iron all plugged in here. I'm just going to go ahead and use my pliers, put a little bit of pressure. All I simply need to do, just touch it to the stem, and it comes right off. You're going to see the positive length is just a little bit longer than the negative length. And also, the sticker helps us out. Now my personal preference here is on the board, you can pass this through the top or the bottom. And what you're going to see is right next to the standoff, you're going to see 5 volts and then BB minus. BB minus stands for the buzzard minus. So I'm going to carefully just pass this through on the very bottom. Open this up just a little bit. Now I'm going to just put a little drop of solder on each one of these connections, and then I'm going to bend it 90 degrees. And then I'm going to take my side cuts, I'm going to carefully trim off any excess I may have. Again, we're confirming that the positive is on the 5 volts and the negative is on the BB minus. Now I'm going to carefully just rotate this up 90 degrees, just like that. Our next step is we're going to install our main control board onto our 4-in-1 ESC. You're going to notice here that you have a connector right on the bottom of your control board, and you also have pins sticking straight up. These are going to be what connect and basically make the connection between your control board and your 4-in-1. Now before we do that, I'm going to carefully guide our receiver satellite connector between my motor leads and along the bottom of my 4-in-1 ESC so it pops out right in front of my 4-in-1 ESC. Just going to simply push that down in between. And this is just a preference to kind of keep everything neat and tidy and as compact and protected as possible. There we go. And now you can see that as I have this, I'm going to be able to rotate this right over the top of the standoffs, and with very gentle pressure, it's going to fit nice and neat down in. Make sure that you don't pull on these leads too hard. If they break loose, simply resolder them. Now that I have my satellite receiver leads in place, I'm going to make my connection on the very bottom. I'll just use my tweezers to help me real quick. Press that down into place just like that. Included with our Lemon receivers, we also have some double-sided tape. I'm going to stick this on the very bottom. Now that we have our Lemon receiver connected, next we're going to install our FPV camera. All we need to do is simply slide this right over the standoff all the way to the bottom. Once we have that down, I'm going to pull my double-sided tape, and I'm just going to kind of carefully stick my satellite receiver right down against the bottom plate of the camera and also the frame. We're going to go ahead and address the antenna lead shortly here, but what I'd like to do right now is concentrate on this wire right here that's going to power our FPV camera. The location we're going to want to solder our FPV camera to the main control board is going to be 5 minus and a 5 volt positive. That's going to be right here is the 5 volt positive, and here's the 5 volt minus. And just like before, we want to make sure that we have enough wire to be able to easily connect it, but not so much that's going to get caught in the props. So I'm just going to carefully guide my wires around, go about a 1/4 inch longer than what I think, and then trim it. Same process as our motors as before. I'm going to strip off the very ends of this wire. Put a little bit of flux on there. Make sure if your wires look like they're frayed, make sure you twist them nice and tight so you get a good clean solder joint. We're going to tin these wires. And also, just to make life easier, I'm going to tin the 2 pads I need. There's 1, and there's 2. You'll see even with me with my shaky hands, it's still possible. There's 2. Now that we have everything connected, it would be a great time to make sure that we don't have any shorts, and we can easily work from the bottom up on this. First of all, I got a voltmeter, and if you guys don't have one of these, they're incredibly affordable. You can get them from Amazon, you can go to Radio Shack if there's still one around, or even Walmart. Put it on continuity, that's gonna be down here, or diode check, sometimes they're one and the same. And what you wanna listen for is if you have continuity, it's gonna beep. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna check our continuity across our positive and negative. Now we don't wanna hear any chirping or long buzzes. Now it's a good thing you do not wanna hear any continuity when you check across your positive and negative. If you hear a noise, that means you have a short. My next step here is I'm gonna touch the negative lead of my battery, and I'm gonna go across the different black ground points and make sure that I have continuity there, but when I touch the positives, I don't have any continuity. Now our final step in all this is we do not want the communication antenna to short out. I'm gonna pass this right underneath my motor lead so they're kind of captured down all the way to the back. And now what we can do is we can pass this down through our rear antenna housings. And oftentimes what I like to do to lock it in is to put a little drop of hot glue on here, and that's gonna keep it in place. Once we're happy with continuity and everything's routed, our last step is to take the little tiny nylon nuts and tighten down our main control board on top of our 4-in-1 ESC. Again, we don't really need any tools for this. We can simply use the tip of our finger, start the thread, and then roll it all the way down. Now it's really important that you don't get too overly tight, but at the same time it's nice and snug, because if your control board wiggles, it's gonna give you weird flight characteristics. Well friends, this portion of the video is now done. We've installed all of our motors, we soldered them onto the 4-in-1 leads. We've also installed our receiver, soldered on our buzzard, and installed our main camera. Our next step here is to pass you over to our good friend Wes in this next coming video, and he's going to basically show you how to load Betaflite, how to change the rotation of your motors, and also how to do a pre-configured dump, which is going to give you all the settings you need for your main control board and your 4-in-1 ESC. Now one thing I do want to point out is you may notice in some of these videos the control board and the 4-in-1 ESC may look slightly different. That's completely okay. The configuration dump that we're going to point you to is going to be the exact one that's made for this to give you a seamless and great experience. Thanks so much for being part of the Flite Test family. We'll see you next build.